Growing up as a kid, I was in love with classic science fiction movies from the 70s to 90s. Stuff like Star Wars, Alien, Blade Runner, Terminator. These were amazing movies that had some form of magic in their unique worlds and aesthetics. That, for a short amount of time, would take me away to distant planets, or a more messed up version of the one we already have. And this is where my love for older media started, and that's why I have a real soft spot when it comes to older anime, where they had that unrestrained creative freedom from the 70s to 90s to produce some incredibly iconic and unique pieces of anime media. And some of my favourites from this time had similar detailed settings that would embody the same feeling I had watching those classic sci-fi movies. But one of my favourite things that I love about older anime in particular, and I think isn't getting represented enough, is the subgenre known as cyberpunk. Cyberpunk is a little hard to define. To me, it's a more realistic depiction of future worlds where humanity has advanced so much into technology and late-stage capitalism that we're on the verge of a collapse and we are awaiting the inevitable end. The term high-tech, low-life is used a lot when people talk of the genre, and it's very much true. You'll have stuff like AI, holograms, cybernetics, large computers with flashy lights and small screens in massive futuristic cities that tower above, juxtaposed to societal struggles, crime and violence, collapse, and dystopian worlds. Cyberpunk is such an awesome genre with recognizable aesthetics and normally genuinely compelling stories and action. And in my biased opinion, it's a genre that is the perfect fit for the medium of anime. Detailed worlds and environments, crazy outlandish ideas and action set pieces with deeply rooted cultural tie-ins. And some of the most renowned anime movies, like Akira and Ghost in the Shell, are a part of this genre, having massive critical acclaim, doing exceptionally well in the West, which at the time was a massive achievement, and even going on to have larger influence into other pieces of media.
It's all supposed to be a little unreal.
And that's the really sad part of it all. The reason I even mention older anime is because that genre and setting isn't seen as much nowadays. But hey, that's understandable. Times change. I mean, space operas and giant robots aren't as popular now. Nowadays, everyone's just become a truck driver.
Why are there children playing in the road? God damn.
And it's such a niche genre, especially now, I don't really see it ever making a massive comeback anytime soon. But to completely destroy that argument, and to be fair, in other mediums, cyberpunk is having a little bit of a resurgence, especially in games. Like 2077, Stray, Ghost Runner, and even little indie titles like Cloudpunk. So there may be some hope.
I never asked for this.
But an anime that has lived rent-free in my head for a while now, that is an exception to all I've just said, is Akudama Drive, which is like a love letter to classic cyberpunk and sci-fi from the 80s and 90s, having the sort of nostalgic charm you could only get from a B-movie at the time, set in a stylized cyberpunk world and having all of the aesthetic charm of neon lights and holographic advertisements, while also featuring a cast of colourful characters, a rich story, and having some insane production value attached to it. Akudama Drive is pure insanity and I love it. Welcome to Kansai, now a dark and desolate city coated in a never-ending rain, augmentation and holographic signs, standing out as a bright neon light in the wasteland of the outskirts. Kansai is the perfect backdrop to this story, as the city looks beautiful and is full of colour and detail. Having a mixture of traditional and futuristic architecture that cyberpunk settings are known for, with many people crammed into its tight streets and little back alleys, all below towering high-rises and skybuses above. And while it is incredibly futuristic, it still has a lot of traditional customs throughout. But this is far from a perfect place, as it is where the Akudama reside, criminals and mercenaries for hire who have a high jail sentence and bounty on their head, only being stopped by the police and executioner department laying down the law as they are told to. The Akudama are focused, smart, determined, thought out, strong, and mentally insane people who do whatever they want. They have this proud sense of freedom that surrounds them, especially in the earlier episodes. Where most comply with conformity, these guys are the ultimate free badass in this futuristic society. Hence why they are always being hunted by the powers that govern Kansai. And in the middle of all of them is an innocent bystander known as Swindler, caught up in a job for trying to do an act of kindness and return a coin to one of the Akudama, and then has to lie about being one of them just so she can stay alive. Someone, in the form of a cat, has assembled a team to do a job, specifically a heist. As to what they're stealing, no one knows, but the stakes are high, with their lives and enough money to set them up for life on the line. But as the executioner forces begin to close in on the group, Swindler, who is caught up in everything, doesn't just question the job, but the world around her, beginning to see that this paradise of a world is nothing more than a fabricated lie. At first, Akudama Drive can come off as a generic adventure and action series, where the main appeal is the setting, character personalities, and insane animation it has, considering the concept isn't really groundbreaking and feels like something that has been done before. But it doesn't take very long for this story to start to pick up pace and spread its wings, and it turns into something truly different and special. There are two sides to Akudama Drive. There's this more darker and serious side to it, showing us a pretty but brutal world and having our cast of characters getting emotionally destroyed by certain events or stemming from it. And then there's the wacky, outlandish, and entertaining side to it that most of it makes up. And it's really hard to put into words how entertaining Akudama Drive is. It's the sort of thing that you can watch and be constantly entertained. There's never a moment in it where you're bored or aren't interested in the story, as it moves at the perfect pace so you can keep up with it, while making sure it never drags out. And then you have all of the wacky and entertaining stuff throughout that keeps the dopamine levels at a regular high. And not just including the vast amounts of colours that detail every environment and scene. I mean, you have a guy who has a motorbike that has a railgun and grappling hook in it that flies through the sky and rides along the side of buildings. Another person can take a fatal cut to the throat only to stitch it up seconds later. Another will literally fly through the sky and force their head through a window. There are lightsabers. Everything in it is brutal, and the fights themselves are explosive with movement and highly saturated colors bouncing everywhere. There's this sense that Akudama Drive just wants to be an entertaining show that destroys logic and reality for the sake of pure spectacle, which is something not uncommon and something that I love about the medium of anime. But this here feels different. Maybe because of the more adult audience it's aiming at, or because it's able to have this pure essence of exciting fun while also delivering an impactful story alongside it. As I said before, I feel like Akudama Drive is a love letter to old school sci-fi, and most obviously, cyberpunk anime from the 80s and 90s. And that's not just because of the setting, the story depicts a classic tale seen throughout cyberpunk and sci-fi alike. One of the higher power having complete control over the world, to have their own rules at play so it can benefit them, featuring fascist and totalitarian ideals, where they forget about the future generations that will inherit this world, as society slowly collapses due to civil unrest only made worse by the powers at play. But even though this can on the surface look like a modern retreading of older ideas that the genre is famous for, it never feels old or anything like that, and it still has so much in it that makes it feel new, exciting, and fresh in a way to differ it. And a lot of that, surprisingly, does come from the atmosphere and tone. So the reason why I initially fell in love with this show was the animation and setting of Kansai, a retro cyberpunk style with modern animation that is the perfect blend of old and new. The whole city bathed in neon lights and holograms that bounce off the characters, brimming with detail like my cyberpunk alley wallpapers.
Why do you come here? For fun?
This is a world that has had thought and effort put into its realization. And even though there is exposition about the lore of the world, so much of it is presented visually. If you look really closely at a lot of the details in the background, you can understand so much more about the world, characters, culture, and history that make up Kansai, that all accumulate into making this feel like a living, breathing world. But that aesthetically pleasant setting allows for a lot more in terms of the world. Akudama Drive constantly portrays its world, while beautiful at times, to be a pretty horrible place with many elements that make this so. Take for instance the heroes of this world, known as the Executioners. They're the ones who take out the Akudama and keep everyone safe. Or so everyone thinks. They in fact act more like the villains than the actual villains, and are shown to be incredibly one-sided. They don't give any thought into their actions and do as they're told. This includes things like killing innocents and children. Pretty fast, you'll catch on to the idea that this world is a pretty horrific nightmare, and not in the way you'd probably assume.
Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we're counting down top 10 sexiest women in anime. Although beauty is in the eye of the beholder, this list will be chosen women in anime.
What a day.
As Swindler continues on with her job, she sees this. The horrific actions the heroes of this world act out, seeing how people are abused by and are controlled by it, along with experiencing a lot of horrible things herself. And all of that makes it easier for her to see how flawed this world really is. And the biggest way she, and thus the viewer, gets to see this is through the colourful cast of characters that are the Akudama. One of the biggest draws of the show is the characters. Each one is incredibly distinct, having their own style, traits, personalities, and abilities. This individuality is seen throughout Akudama Drive, as these 7 people will constantly overcome a challenge in 7 different ways. And while the characters are crazy and outlandish, bordering on satirical at times, they still feel like real people, to a degree. They're labelled as basic criminals, and yes, do commit serious crimes, some more than others. But they're also shown to have this depth to their characters where you can understand why they act in the ways they do. Brawler is so strong, he just wants to fight and have a challenge. Hacker, similarly, is so smart and has nothing left to excite him, so the concept of an impossible task is more than intriguing to the both of them. Courier wants to complete the jobs he gets. He's a perfectionist, with a 900 trophy score. Doctor is... Swindler only wants to help people, and she's introduced to the group doing a kind act. And Hoodlum just wants to feel big and have a name for himself, but deep down, he's no more than a petty thug. While quite superficial, this extra layer to each individual character does make them out to be a bit more than just basic criminals that kill and do whatever they want for no reason. I mean, besides a cutthroat and doctor, ooh, very nice, who are just basic criminals, but even they have a purpose in the story and serve that purpose with their brutality. Animation is also cleverly used with establishing their characters. Each character design is distinct with the way they look and the colours they have. Courier looks pretty average. He doesn't really stand out, and you could walk past him without really knowing he was an Akudama, which is fitting as he's a person who doesn't take risks or wants to stand out. Cutthroat is all white, a bleached and pale character who doesn't really have much of a personality besides killing, and his white attire only highlights the red blood even more. Hoodlum definitely looks the best, with his outfit, shades, and hair. God damn, he looks styling.
You look like a cut of fuckable meat, are you?
But this is all a facade. Brawler and Doctor both wear revealing outfits in their own way, showing they don't really care who sees them and they won't take anything from anyone. But Brawler is muscular and Doctor is more refined and slender. The character design is one thing, but that paired with the actual animation truly realizes these characters. Take Doctor. She's animated more slowly, making her out to be this elegant, cunning person with the way she walks and moves. Hacker is basically still and doesn't have much movement. He only really ever moves with his eyes and fingers when he's doing the Watch Dogs hacking minigame. That, compared to Hoodlum's somewhat cartoonish mannerisms and faster animation, just shows his lack of skill and experience. This is something that uses the medium of animation to its fullest, something that you can't really do in live action. You can interpret the characters not only from how they look and act, but how they're actually animated, how they physically appear in this world. And when it comes to these characters being the bad guys, unlike other anime villains who are comically evil for the point of being evil, all of the Akudama's actions and the way they operate aren't just done out of pure insanity, mostly. There's this sense of purpose and reason to their methods, especially when considering their characters. Now, this isn't every character to be fair, but most of them only ever make a move to remove a threat or problem in their way and only if it's necessary, but I'm not going to sugarcoat it. At the end of the day, these are the bad guys. No doubt about it. Okay, it reminds me of this Payday 2 web series from a while back where it would have like the characters saying how, oh, they're not the bad guys, and it was like the showrunners trying to like frame them as the good guys.
Are we the good guys or the bad guys?
And if you play the game, it's like, yeah, good guys incinerate the law enforcement who have families to feed.
Are we the good guys or the bad guys?
And this is kind of a weird thing to say, but I'm tired of the bland anime protagonist character archetype, where they're always this white knight hero who does good for everyone because they're just such a good guy. It's just so overused and not interesting to me. And it also doesn't help that a lot of the time the characters are beyond shallow and have no depth to their actions. And hey, if you like this self-insert hero protagonist characters, go ahead, I'm not gonna stop you. But I just like seeing a bunch of villains who know they're the bad guys and aren't just bad for the sake of being bad as the center point for once. It's the same sort of thing in something like Black Lagoon, having this awesome group of pirates as the stars, because sometimes the villains are way more entertaining than the heroes could ever be, and crazily enough, no character actually has a real name. I thought this was just me, but no, every character goes by their codename or rank: Swindler, Doctor, Brawler, Hacker, Executioner, Master, and Pupil. Which I just think adds so much more to this world and their characters. They're more symbols than people in this world. They're represented and act through their codename. They're no more than what the public perceives them as. Another cool little thing that I noticed that also relates to that is the only time these characters actually open up and talk is when they're out of the light. When they're out of the neon lights of the city, and in the darkness where no one can see them, be that in the back alleys or the ruins of the outskirts. The only time when these people are themselves and not the Akudama they're symbolized as is when no one will know, because that symbol of who they are means nothing when they're out of the public's view. People don't see, let alone know, that they're multi-layered individuals, or really see them as people in general. They're seen as criminals and nothing else to the executioners, so why should the city and people see them as any different? And it's within these calm moments that we understand these characters in a more down-to-earth level. The subtle ways they interact with each other, their body language, and how they talk really captures the essence of these people being people for once. And Swindler sees this as she gets to know these people over the course of the story, and only gets to be emotionally destroyed as the executioners slowly hunt them down with no remorse. Okay, so I'm gonna be showing some visual spoilers up here, along with referring to the ending without saying it outright, so if you want to watch it, best idea is to leave now. Thought I'd just warn you.
Wake the fuck up, mommy. I pissed the bed.
In the genre of cyberpunk, they've always looked at what the future can hold for humanity, what grim and dark fates lie to us, while also having, cool aesthetics. It's the whole reason I even came to Akudama Drive in the first place. But that setting truly adds a lot of weight to the story and characters. When I was near finishing this for the first time, I was thinking, this whole series was a thrill ride, a fun time in some pretty colours, because that's really what I came to it for. But then at the end, that gets turned upside down. The pretty city, the neon lights, they're all a facade for what's truly hiding beneath. Kansai. It looks pretty, but it's far from it. A world where the people who are meant to protect us are the ones killing us. A world where its people are more symbols, and the only time they can be themselves is when no one will see them. Where we make entertainment out of killing people. And a lot of not cool things happen in this world, where no one takes any notice. Swindler at the start of the series is incredibly naive. She doesn't really see the world as anything besides the place she lives. And she got to experience this other side to her world and see it through the characters. The criminals she had spent all this time with and understood on a level that no one else would. By the end, she can fully see how broken Kansai is. Kansai, the cyberpunk setting, is a plot device. It's not just a cool cyberpunk wallpaper. It's not just a setting. You kind of have to watch it twice to understand this, but the story kind of centers around it and always stems back to it. This is a place brimming with life and culture. Everything from the cars they drive to the buildings, every piece of environmental art conveys this sense this is a living, breathing world. It's not just an empty space the characters move through. It's an overwhelming presence always with the characters, wherever they are, and with many people in it who are all just completely nullified to what's happening around them. A lot of the time, we choose to block out the world around us and what's really happening. We do this because we don't want to be reminded how dark our world is, so we choose to block it out. This is the world of Akudama Drive, and that's what the people of Kansai are doing. When I said Kansai was the perfect backdrop to the story, I really meant it. The pretty aesthetic, the colours are all just a way to cover up this brutal world. They're, in a metaphorical way, being blinded by those pretty neon lights. And that stuff I was saying before about how the only time these characters are themselves is when they're out of the light, it's because that's the only time they're not being blinded by them, when they're not in the lie of their perfect world. And in the end, Swindler chose not to be blinded. She, unlike everyone around her, got to experience the world from the other side and got to see what it really was. All of the horrific actions and things that make up this place. And instead of just blocking it out and hoping it all changes, she makes the sacrifice to fix it. I love Akudama Drive. It's the perfect homage to an incredible genre, and I think one of the better pieces of original anime that has come out in recent memory. It really saddens me this genre in anime is basically non-existent now, and we've just hit an infinite resource glitch when it comes to isekai.
I've seen things.
Akudama Drive has an ending, but it was open enough to continue the story, or maybe have a second season. But let's be honest, we're never gonna get one. We never do. So let's appreciate what we had here.